So the Canon R5 is finally reaching users' hands, and I also just got mine. This is being shot on the Canon R5 at the 4K high quality settings, 23.98p. So I want to talk to you guys just on my initial impressions from the camera, a couple of things in regards to editing the footage, and a few notes on using the CF Express cards, what worked for me or what I actually ended up finding out. So let's get started and let's talk about the R5. Tiago with Classical Technology here. Thank you for joining me for another video. If you like my content, remember to smash that like button, subscribe, leave a comment below. What are your thoughts on the Canon R5? Now, of course, the big news with the Canon R5 has been overheating issues that have come up. Various people have mentioned it. Now, I will say that so far, I've only had the camera a few days and I haven't encountered the overheating issue, but I also haven't recorded very long footage. So for my use case, for what I do, doing a lot of B-roll and things of that nature, I haven't encountered it yet, but I'm sure that the more I use the camera and start to record more footage, I'm likely to come up against that barrier. But for now, at least for doing shorter clips, and if I do have a lot of overheating issues where I feel like the camera, at least for my use case, is unusable or something like that, I'll definitely update in a more detailed video. The second thing we'll talk about is CF Express cards. Now, you need to be careful which one that you get because not all of them are going to work with the highest settings on this camera. For example, I bought initially the Pro Grade 256 gigabyte CF Express card. I got it off Amazon and it said 1700 megabytes per second. So I kind of looked at that and I thought, oh, that's really fast. But what I learned is the most important spec on these cards, it's actually going to be the minimum constant speed at which they write. And in that case, that card, the minimum constant speed is about 300 megabytes a second. And the camera, when you're doing 8K RAW at the highest settings, is around 325 megabytes per second. So with that card, the camera let me record only for about 30 seconds before it gave me an error saying that the write speed is too slow on the card. So I got the 512 gigabyte version. It's still the gold, so the same as the 256, but the main difference is that the constant minimum write speed is about 400 megabytes per second. So that means you're going to be well above the threshold of the camera for recording 8K RAW, so you shouldn't have any issues. And of course, they also make their Cobalt series, which I believe is like 1400 megabytes per second minimum write speed or something like that. It's ridiculously fast. I think most likely some of the other cards on the market, such as the SanDisk 500 gigabyte card, that should work. I think I saw that Canon actually does recommend that one. It is a little bit more expensive than the Pro Grade one. So the third thing that we're going to talk about is actually editing this footage. Now, I've been trying it on various different systems, the most powerful of which has a 2080 Ti as well as a 14-core Intel processor. So even on a very powerful computer like that, the footage from the R5, especially the 8K and the really intense codecs, it absolutely chokes up and does not go smoothly at all. For example, on the S1H with the new ProRes RAW update, it's super smooth if you're using Final Cut Pro or in Premiere. It's very uncompressed, so everything works really, really nicely. Now, 8K RAW does seem to edit a little bit faster. It's not as choppy as the other codecs, which makes sense as RAW is usually a little bit less compressed, but it still really does beat up a very powerful computer. And of course, with RAW, you're dealing with massive file sizes. And I've also tested this on an iMac Pro with an 8-core Xeon CPU, as well as the Vega 56 GPU. And I got pretty much the same result as the PC with the 2080 Ti and the 14-core Intel processor. It choked up pretty much the same on this R5 footage. And apparently the main issue here is that the current hardware just can't decode the codec that Canon uses, the 422. So that's definitely a little bit of an issue until we get some hardware that can actually decode it, such as the Apple Silicon. So basically, I think the best thing to do in the meantime is just to transcode the footage into something like ProRes 422 or 422 HQ. That way, of course, it's going to take a little bit of time. I had one video that I did try to transcode. It took maybe like about half an hour, but the file size was huge. It was almost 200 gigabytes. So you have to make sure that you're going to have that space there for when you transcode. But when you bring that file into your editing program, be it Final Cut Pro, Premiere, or DaVinci Resolve, you're going to have a much smoother time. In fact, when I brought that into DaVinci Resolve, it was 100% smooth when it was in ProRes 422 HQ. No stutter stutters at all. The footage, 8K footage, was very, very fast because it was transcoded. If I tried to do that with the codec that comes out of the camera, you're going to have a lot of trouble. And then a few quick notes on actually using the camera. I haven't mentioned it too much just because I just got it recently and I really need time to kind of, play with it and do different shots and see how it is before I give my opinion on it. But on the offset, the first thing that I noticed is that the IBIS is extremely good. I'm using the Canon RF 24-70 2.8, which also has image stabilization. So it's doing dual stabilization between the camera and the lens. I believe it gives you about 8 stops or something like that. But so far, I'm very happy with the IBIS. It feels like it's just floating or you're on a gimbal. Now, in terms of that wobble effect people were getting in the corners, I believe that was mostly with the RF 15-35 lens when you're really wide at around 15 millimeters. Using the 24-70, I have not seen that issue. And of course, lastly, let's talk about some of my initial impressions on the image quality. So far, I've done a couple of videos, and first off the bat, I really like the way that Canon does their colors. That comes out absolutely beautiful, and the image, whether it be in 8K, 4K, I think it's absolutely fantastic, even in 4K 120p, like a slow motion mode, or 4K 60. But definitely one big issue here and one big drawback that I must mention, the dynamic range of the R5 is not as good as the S1H. The S1H has much better highlights and just much better dynamic range in general. So the dynamic range is where this camera is a little bit lacking, and that's where I would say compared to the S1H, while the colors and a lot of the image quality is really great on the Canon R5, the dynamic range is not as good as the S1H. So in terms of the image quality, I really do like sort of the colors and the way the image looks, while something like the Panasonic S1H definitely has considerably more dynamic range. I've heard that Canon may be doing a firmware update to the R5 that would allow you to use Canon Log 3, then opening up and giving you a lot better dynamic range. And then I think it's going to be a lot more competitive with stuff like the S1H. And then to close off on just how the camera feels in your hands, I really like it. I like the material that it's made out of. It's a fairly large camera for a mirrorless camera. It's a little bit bigger than the EOS R. I have somebody who's a 5D Mark IV user, and when he picked this camera up, he thought that it felt kind of like that, like a bigger camera, which in a way for these type of cameras, it's pretty good. You want something with a good grip. And in my opinion, when a camera's a little bit heavier, it definitely makes using it for video easier because the stable footage is going to be something you're always looking for, and the heavier it is, you're going to get that a lot better. So as I have more time with the camera, I'll definitely update you guys on my experience using not only the camera, but everything connected with it, like what type of memory cards are working best, how am I editing the footage, what type of lenses am I using with it, because you definitely need the entire experience. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching. Remember to smash that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.